Okay, brilliant. I haven't had anyone drop in the chat box that they can't see my screen, so we will go ahead. Like I said, if you do have any questions moving forward, please do give me a shout. Okay, perfect. So this morning, we're going to go through the training webinar of our privacy suite. So our Cyber Comply platform hosts 5 different tools. We've got the VS Risk and Compliance Manager, which is another training webinar, and then we've got our privacy tools, which is Data Flow Mapping Tool, DPIA, and our GDPR Manager. So those are the 3 I'm covering today. If you do want any information about the others, I can let you know the link to the next webinar at the end of this. So in today's discussion, I'll just give you a brief introduction of all of the tools, just mentioning a case study. I'm sure some of you have seen in the news about Morrison's, so it's just an example of why it is so important. The different user management, there's different role statuses that you can have on Cyber Comply, so we'll just cover those. And then I'll get stuck in, I'll show you the tools, give you an example, and then, like I said, we'll have the Q&A session at the end. So, in the introduction, so like I mentioned, Cyber Comply is our online cybersecurity platform. It hosts the 5 tools. All of these integrate with one another, and they also work individually as well. So our privacy tools that we'll cover today, they each focus on a specific aspect of EU GDPR. So they're designed to help you meet the regulation and also demonstrate your compliance. We've got the data flow mapping tool, so it's simplifying your process of creating the data flow maps that you need. And then you've got the DPIA tool, so it will help you as an organization determine whether your data protection impact should be conducted. So a DPIA is required if the process is likely to result in high risk to the rights and freedoms of your data subjects. Then we've got the GDPR Manager, so assessing your organization's data protection practices. This includes recording and reporting data breaches, handling data subject access requests, DSARs, and then also determining whether your third parties have suitable measures in place to protect your personal data. So we'll have a look at the data flow mapping tool. So these are the features and benefits. So the main thing is logging your personal data items. That's what it's all about. With the data flow mapping tool, you essentially generate an inventory of this personal data. You specify what the lawful basis is for processing, the different types, so if it's a sensitive personal data item, and what categories your data subjects are as well. Initially, it will do that, and then it generate any flow reports as well, which is the end result. So this is what you're going to use to demonstrate your compliance. Their version controlled data flow report, so it will compile all of the information on your map into an easy to read format. Geared for repeatability, so it's designed to evolve as your organization does as well. Embeds data protection by design, so essentially organizations can seek to embed data protection by design and default as part of GDPR, and this helps you to do that. Gives optional security controls, so one of our compliance manager, this works integrated to data flow mapping tool and just gives you the option to look at your organization processes, not just in the eyes of GDPR, but other specific regulations and control sets as well. And then lastly, it's easy to use, so it really simplifies the process. So we've got the DPIA tool, so again, we'll run through the features and benefits. So the DPIA tool, as you will see a bit later on, does integrate directly with the data flow mapping tool. So you map out your process, and then if it is a high risk process, you would then use the DPIA. So speeds up, you can quickly determine whether a DPIA is required and then assess if the process is likely to result in high risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. Of course, the DPIA is aligned to GDPR, so it will help your organization meet the requirements of Article 30. Standardize the procedure, so everyone essentially singing off the same hymn sheet. The DPIA tool has all the best practices built in, and you can conduct a comprehensive DPIA which follows a consistent approach across all processing activities. Easy to share. So again, the different role statuses that you can have on CyberComply comes into play here slightly. It's easy, really easy to share any of the information with key stakeholders and your supervisory authority as well. And then lastly, review, update and maintain. So like the data flow mapping tool, it's geared for repeatability. And it's designed for you as your organizations it evolves, it changes, the way you process changes. This will change with you and evolve as well. So then the last part of our privacy suite is the GDPR Manager. So the only way the GDPR Manager differs slightly from the other two tools is that it consists of 4 modules, so it's a 4-in-1 tool essentially, each focusing on a different specific core aspect of GDPR. So you've got the gap analysis module giving you instant visibility of your current compliance status. You've got the DSAR module, so you're keeping records of all your data subject access requests, pulling off reports as well. You can see here we've also got the breach report module, so you're keeping a record of all the breaches and incidents that perhaps your organization might face. And then you've got the due diligence of your third-party management module, so again keep track of the processes and controllers that your organization is working with. So moving on to the GDPR Manager features and benefits. So like we mentioned, you've literally got 4-in-1, so it can do multiple tasks. It's all on the same platform. You don't have to go between different folders, different Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, etc. It's all there. Like the rest of the privacy tools, they're all aligned to GDPR, so you know that everything you do is demonstrating that compliance. It is in line with that regulation. Again, easy to share, comes into play with the different role statuses that you might have. You can have multiple users within an organization, log on from any locations. If you have remote workers on your project team, that's fine. You can all look at the same reporting feature, and then yeah, you can update any information as well, so geared for repeatability. Simplifies and speeds up. Like all of the privacy tools essentially are designed to help your GDPR compliance easier, more streamlined, everything in the same place. Your reports are easy to run. You can run a variation of reports and have it all in one place. So then we just look into the case study. So I mean, I won't spend too much time on this. You guys can have a read in your own time. But essentially, I don't know if any of you've seen a senior internal auditor leaked nearly 100,000 employees' payroll information. That the person who did that was arrested and sentenced to prison, and then it still goes. So that happened in 2014, but it's still going on. If Morrison's is found liable, because they're arguing that perhaps they're not, but if they are found liable, they've already spent £2 million on the breach. They'll then have to pay compensation to all of those 100,000 employees. So it just goes to show how long a breach can last, how the effects can last, and how costly reputational-wise and financial-wise. So you'll get a copy of the slideshow after this webinar, and there's a link there if you want to read more. So then we'll go into user management. So how many users can you have? On the initial license you purchase, the tool comes with 5 users. If your organization does need to extend this, then it's absolutely fine. If you speak to myself or my colleagues, then we can arrange that to fit your requirements. Different role statuses. So I've gone on about this a little bit. There's 4. So you've got the organization administrator. So organization administrator has full editing capabilities across the platform, and they also have the ability to change the role status of any other users as well. Then you have contributor, so full editing capabilities on the platform. Read only, so this is where sharing any of your reports across all of the modules, where you can do that. So you have an unlimited number of read-only roles. It doesn't take up any of your 5 users. This is really good for senior management, for stakeholders. Then come on, they can view your projects, view the map that you've created, or perhaps the the breach that you've reported, and then look at the reports as well while they're still on the platform. And then you can revoke roles. So if someone's left the organization, etc., you revoke their role, and then that frees up a user space for any of the other users in your organization that need to have a role. So this is just to, this will make more sense once we go into the tool, but just so you're aware, this is how you get to all of the different tools. So this is your main drop-down menu on the dashboard. Processes, data flow mapping tool and DPIA tool are both found in processes. And then the GDPR Manager is under the tasks. So you've got the breach report, the DSAR and the third party, and then you've got the gap analysis module of the GDPR Manager as well. So using the tools, so we'll go into using the tools. I will start by going through data flow mapping tool. I'll then take you into the DPIA tool, and then we'll have a look at the GDPR Manager. Also, just to remind everyone, if you do have any questions as I'm going through, please feel free to pop them in the question box, and then I'll answer them when we've finished going over all of the tools. So as you can see the dashboard, what I'll do is I'll go over the dashboard after I've gone over the tools individually, as it will make a lot more sense. But essentially, it gives you a top level view. So I have all 5 tools on my account, which is why my dashboard is very full. So it really depends on what tools you have, on what you'll see on the dashboard. It gives you that top level view. Again, if you've got any stakeholders or senior managements that you give a read-only role to, then this is really an excellent place for them to go to and have a look, quick snapshot of where you're up to. And as mentioned, this is how you get to your processes and your risk assess of your task, for the GDPR Manager. So before we go into processes, which is data flow mapping tool and DPIA, I'll take you to assets. So it's really easy to import your asset register. Once you import your asset register, you only need to do it once. So no matter how many tools you have on the platform, it is global. The register is global. So it's not something you have to repeat yourself and duplicate the workload. 2 ways you can add an asset is either import them on an Excel template. So you simply download this Excel template. If you have already got an existing asset register that you're using, you can literally just transfer the relevant fields onto our template. All you need to do then is drag and drop it into this box here. And then as soon as you import, however many assets, there's no limit, will then automatically go onto the CyberComply platform and you have them to use. Or equally, you can do it individually. So the fields that you see here, the asset type, the reference, operator, and location, you find them on the Excel spreadsheet as well. So it's exactly the same. This is just adding them as individuals. So you can see here, you would select from the drop-down list on what that asset type is. If there's other, then obviously select other, and then you've got the location here. Description, that's not a mandatory field, but if you did want to add that description, then of course there is room for you to do that as well. And then simply you just save and then your asset populates. So just to give you an idea, you can see I've got green and I've got purple. All the only difference is all of the purple assets are owned by the account. So whatever account is your organization, that will be purple, and then anything else, whether it's third party, joint controller, joint processor, they will all be green. So another thing to note on the organization assets is that you can pull a report here. You can run a report of your asset register. The thing is, you can run a number of different reports on this page showing a different combination of assets. So whatever is relevant to your organization and how you see particular assets are related to one another and you want to document that relationship, this allows you to do that. So essentially the report runs of any assets that you've opened on that middle panel. So that's up to you how you select them on this side to open it, or you can select all. And then down here we have tabs that allow you to show how this particular asset is related to other areas of your compliance. So that would be other modules of the Cyber Comply portal. So to give you a run through, if you had VS risk, any risks that were related to that particular asset, you would show here. Related records, so as we're actually mapping out our data, any of the personal data records that we create, and they are stored on that asset, they will automatically show here. If you want to show that another asset is related to that asset, you can associate asset. It will give you the option of your entire register, and then you would manually add that like so. This, you can either add any comments, drag and drop any supporting documentation that might be relevant, and then there's also an audit trail as well. So you and the other users on your portal, you have an idea of who's changing what. You know, say you've come in after a week off, you can go into here and see, oh, okay, well, the last person to edit this asset, etc. Then any processes, so this is another automatic, any processes that are related to that asset will show here. If there are any tasks, you can create this task to any of the users on your portal. That includes read-only users as well. Assign a deadline. If there's any hyperlinks that are relevant, say to a SharePoint document or something like that, you can do so here. And then the next three are part of the Compliance Manager module. So I said that allows you additional controls and regulations. So those three are those. And the assets there. So yeah, essentially it is very simple. It's designed to be simple. That's your asset register. So before you actually go and map out your personal data in the process, yeah, you can add additional assets when you're actually on the canvas of the map, but it's always a better idea to get the bulk done first, and then if you need to add any additional, you can do so. So before we go into processes, and I'll run through creating a process and going through the map that I have created, I just want to show you the settings. So the settings area of Cyber Comply is where you add all your customized fields. So you can see here we've got classifications. The 4 confidential to restricted, these are default classifications that are already in the Cyber Comply portal. So they're classifications of personal data records. It just allows, if there's another way that your organization defines it, then you can add an additional classification. So that's up to you. And then it will be available when you're mapping out. Same with custom regions. So this is in terms of the asset location. We've got the country, for example, you can see here the location is USA, but perhaps you wanted to just be a bit more specific. Yeah, it's in the USA, it's huge, it's specifically in California, for example. Then we've got contact details. So if you toggle this on to use registered address, when you're in account summary here, this is your account, your organization's account. So if you've put in that account summary your organization's contact details, address, phone number, you can then use registered address and toggle this on, which means later on when you're mapping out the process and you're declaring who that controller is for the process, it just saves you time. You don't have to add the controller details, as it will take this. Additionally, if you as the organization aren't the controller, then you can add the controller contact details here. Same with your DPO and a representative. So then we've got personal data items. So the rest of these fields, again, is just being specific and being able to customize the options later on in all of the tools. So we have a default list of personal data items, things that the majority of organizations will probably process one way or another, like name, email address, etc. There's no limit to the amount of customized personal data items you can add. So this is completely up to you. And you can be as specific as required as well. And remember, anything that you write on here is going to be shown and documented on the report that's the end result, word for word. So as specific as you can be, then the better. So you can see here, literally all you need to do is add personal data item, you type it in, and then you save, and then that will save your personal data item just like that. So it's very easy, and then that will become available. You can toggle them off or delete them. If you toggle them off, it just won't be an option later on in the map. But of course, you can't delete any of the data items that are already being used in another part of the Cyber Comply. So works in the same way. You've got any customized data subjects and data sources, and the last two are part of VS Risk, so I won't spend too much time on them. So once you've done all that, you've added most of your customized fields, you've added your asset register, it's then time to actually go into the data flow mapping tool and map out your process. So to create new, you first of all would create a process group. How you as an organization split up your processes is down to you and whatever fits your requirements and how you split up the different areas of your organization. Simply to create new group, you would just need to add the name, subtitle and description, and then that's done. So you can see here I've got the 4 process groups there, and then within that process group you have the specific processes that you then map out. So to create a new process, you simply select the particular group it falls underneath and then add process. And it's just a matter of filling out all the relevant fields. All of the information that the tool is asking you for is relevant to what is required by GDPR. And everything you write here is then shown on the report. So you do the title, process owner, and then what they're acting as. So like I just mentioned in the settings section, if you select it as controller, it will automatically take your organization's, if that's what you've set it as, your organization's contact details, so you won't need to enter it again. Of course, if that's not right, then you don't have to set it in the settings section, or joint processor, it will ask you for the controller details. If you are working with a representative, then here is space to add that in. And then all the requirements by GDPR. So what is the scope of your process? What is the purpose for processing those personal data items? And then what technical and organizational security measures do you have in place? So this is all at the basic level. Be as detailed as you can be in here, but then when you're actually going through and mapping out, then for purpose, for example, you have to have the lawful basis, and there's room to add the specifics. So that is simply how you create a process. And then once you do so, you'll see all of the lists down here. So the one I'm going to go through today is HR processes. Most organizations will have a similar process, and simply our absent employee has called in sick, can't come in, and then they go through the process of a return to work form, etc. So hopefully you'll be able to relate in some way to this example. Just a note though, you can see we've got the exact same options that we had in the asset register. So you can pull off that kind of report as well. So of course you've got the processes that are within the same group, but say you did just want processes that are split across your business, and but they are still related in some way or another. All you have to do is open them up on this middle panel. You can pull off a report. Another thing I would mention is you can clone your process. So this is really handy if you have a lot of processes in your organization that are pretty much the same, if not very, very, very similar. They just have maybe one personal data item that's slightly different, maybe one different method of processing, of transfer. Rather than duplicating your workload, spending all that time creating a map and having to do it all again, you can simply clone the process. It clones everything, the asset and the map. So then you can go into that cloned version and then you can change the name, change that particular personal data item, etc. So it just saves you a lot of time. And then to go into the canvas itself, you simply go into the data flow map. So to save a bit of time, so we've got a lot to cover, I've created half a map essentially, so I'm going to build out the rest of my map with you. But before I do, I just want to go over the basic functions for those of you on the webinar today who do already have the tool. So of course, once you go onto this canvas, it's going to be a blank canvas. Now it shows you the amount of the screen that you have, but this does expand. So your maps can be very large, very complex, just to suit your organization requirements essentially. The first time you ever open a canvas for your data flow map, the user manual will automatically appear. It only does it the first time you go into a particular canvas, as you've just seen. It didn't for me. but it will always be available here. So again, that's just something to be aware of. If you are going through your map and you just need a quick help, you can do that there, and then that will help you straight away. Then you've got the option to view your report and export it. So I will cover that after we go through actually mapping out the data. Then moving, we've got the 4 main tools in the data flow mapping tool. So this is how you actually map out the flow essentially. So you've got the comment tool, which allows you to add comments on any of the data inputs, the data connection lines, or the assets, or the data subject. So whatever you have on your map. With the comments, you can add any supporting documentation as well that might be relevant to that particular asset. So it has that function, it allows you to build on that. Then moving along, you've got the connection tool. So the connection tool, as you can see, is this. And the direction of the arrow is, of course, the direction of the transfer. And then the numbers that you can see, so I've got 3 6s, they start populating once you actually are inputting the data item. So you'll see the numbers on my connection lines change as we add some more personal data items. And then you have the move tool. So the move tool allows you to manipulate the configuration. Like I've mentioned at the very beginning, the tool is designed for repeatability. So as your organization evolves, the tool will evolve with you as well, which means sometimes rather than creating a whole new process, you just need to add different, maybe more data gets inputted at a different stage later down the line. So this allows you to have that flexibility to add it. So as you can see, when I move this around, none of the existing data connection lines break, which means that I could then fit another asset in here. So it just allows you to build those really complex maps. And also with the move tool, when we start populating the rest of the map on today's training session, you'll see I'll use the move tool to just place them where they need to go in the flow, so you can drag and drop using that. Then you have your hand tool. So the hand tool opens up what we call the attributes panel. The hand tool is essentially how you build your report. So it allows you to add all of the information that is necessary to demonstrate your compliance with GDPR. So you'll see as we're going through, and you basically have to fill in your attributes panel for everything on your map. So each of the data inputs, each of the connection lines, each of the assets, if you have data subjects on your map, each of the data subjects, and you move between one and fill that out. So with the assets, it's all about declaring the retention period on that particular asset of their data items. In the data input, you can see here, it's all about adding that data. The connection lines, what is that method? How is it being transferred? Are there any encryption details? So that's probably going to be your best friend while you're mapping out on the data flow mapping tool. Then moving along, we've just got the typical tools: zoom in, zoom out, delete, duplicate, etc. Then you've got this left-hand panel down here. So I did mention in the asset register section of CyberComply that you can add new assets here. So if you add the new asset here, it then does become available globally as well. So it becomes part of your your asset register, sorry. If you do, you just select the asset type. So I'll just give you the example and then open it up. So all of the fields that you can see here are exactly the same fields that are required in the organization asset side of things. So it just, if you do forget one or you're mapping out and you realize that there is an additional asset, it gives you that freedom to add it here. So I will just delete that now. And then you've got the data input. So that is the part of the process where the data enters your process. You can have as many data inputs as is relevant on your map. One thing I would say, just remember that each connection line is one method. So another example I had was a donations process. So it might be the same 5 data items that are going into the process, but those same 5 data items might enter the process, one by phone call, one face-to-face, one letter, email, etc. Each one of those inputs needs a different data input, even though there's the same data items, because you have to show that there's a different transfer method, because different transfer methods might have additional measures for security against them. For example, email might be encrypted, so you need to show that. But you can add as many different data inputs as possible. So we're going to add an additional one into the map, and you can see I'll move it and align it where it fits the map. Then you've got the data subject. So I don't have one of these on the map today, but you would use this if there's a point in your process where any of the data items are returned back to the data subject. For example, in a sales process when there's a receipt. And then you've got the asset. So this is all of your asset register that you've already inputted into the tool. And you can simply search here and it will bring it straight to the top. So I'm going to add a couple additional ones to this map. So we've got our file cabinet. And as you can see, you simply select it and it drops it straight onto the canvas. And then I can move this here. And then I'm also adding a secure destruction company. Again, you just add it and then I can drop it. And then lastly, I'm going to add the attendance database. Which is not here. Cool. So then I'll collapse that library. Okay, so now I've got all of the information here. So I've got the wrong database. So I'll just put that as attendance. Like so. And then apply, and there you go. Okay, perfect. So then we've got our connection line. So simply drop it here. And then drop it here. So then that's your connection. And then we'll say from the HR team to the file cabinet to the destruction company, and then our HR team to the attendance database. So you'll notice on this connection line, we've got a warning. There's nothing wrong. What that's letting me know is I've set my destruction company in a third country. So this just gives you that warning so you're aware. You just need to select if there's appropriate safeguards in place. Once I apply, it then goes away. So then I'll show you about populating the actual map itself. So you go through this logically. What is the data source? So the data source is our data subject. What is our data subject? Well, it's our absent employee. And then the method. So in this sense, our absent employee has phoned in. And then we've got add data. Okay, so there's two ways you can add data, either creating a record, which I'll show you, and it's in the other data input, or as individual data items. So because not in all cases data items are associated to a record, so this allows you to show that. So you select your data subject. So again, this is now where all of the customized sections come into play. So everything in that settings area that you've added, this is where you'll see them. Any customized fields you've added go straight to the bottom, so you can just select. So this is our staff, is our data subject. Then we've got personal data items. So again, this is the default list of the personal data items we have, but any of the customized ones we've added go straight to the bottom. So in this sense, we're going to have the name, upcoming engagements, the reason for absence, any medical intervention, predicted period of absence. So you can see how I'm just going straight to the bottom to find all of the customized ones I've added. And you can see as well how the list builds up, and if any are wrong, you just simply deselect them and add the rest. Then you've got the option of sensitive data items. So if that is the case, you would then select those. So what is our lawful basis, contractual necessity, and what's the exception? Why are we actually allowed to process those sensitive data items as well? So it allows you to select that. Now once I save and I apply, you can see that the 6 is now populated. So now it's just a matter of going on to my next asset, so line manager. And then it's the storage. So part of GDPR, you have to declare the retention period. So what is that storage? Now, just for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to put everything as 7 years because that is our typical Outlook setting. So I'm just going to put it for argument's sake, but of course you would be specific to your organization. And then you simply apply. So then it's going on to the next data connection line. So our method, we've got email here. So what data is actually being transferred? So as these particular data items aren't part of a record, they're not moving as a whole. So in this case, for example, the HR doesn't need to know the upcoming engagement. So you simply deselect that. They would need to know everything else, or perhaps the HR team don't need to know the predicted period of absence because they just need to know the period of absence on the return to work form. So you would deselect that. Everything else stays the same once you apply. So now you can see why this is now 4. So then just showing you the absent employee here, everything's exactly the same. You've got the data source, the reference, the method, and then in the data, we've got a record. So you can see all of these fields are exactly the same. This just means that all of these data items are moving as a whole on a record. So they can't be deselected like I've just shown you. So create a record, you would add all of the relevant fields, and then that's done there. So then you save, and then you apply. So then it's a matter of going to the storage. So we've got the individual data items on here, and then we've also got the record as a whole. So you'd need to do that for both, and then you apply. And then say on this, we've got the data items as well. So we would save and apply. So you can see how once you've got the skeleton of your map laid out, especially, how easy it is to then just go through in a logical order between each of the connection lines to say the transfer, like so. And then each of the assets to say, okay, well, what's that storage period on there? So again, we've got the data. At this point, it's just our return to work form. The method will be face-to-face, and then you'd apply. And then the same with this. So add data, we've only got the return to work, and then it would be face-to-face, like so. So you can see how this moves through and how just by looking at it, you can clearly see where your data items are. So I will show you the report. So the report breaks everything down in a table format. So you can see here you've got the whole summary of the process. So all of these fields are what you would have written at the very beginning. Then you've got the map. So straight away it sees you. Once you export this into a Word document, you can edit the necessary sections, for example, the logo, to make it a bit more personal for your organization, but also there will be a link. So if you are looking at this on your Word document, you can then go straight into CyberComply if you are a user through this link. So then you've got the personal data inventory. So you can see it's got the summary. Then you've got all of the data items that are associated to a record. You've got all the relevant fields about that record, and then a list of every single data item and where that data source has come from. Like I mentioned, I don't have a data subject on my map. If I did, this would show here. So then you've got a register of all of your assets involved. So you can see here, green are just anything that's not owned by the organization, the account owner. So, and that's again why you've got that exclamation mark. It just means it's not owned by the organization whose account it is. Then you've got the transfer. So this is why this is crucial that you use that right-hand attributes panel to enter all of the information on your connection lines, because you have the method, the data source, the exact data items, where they're going from, to, what encryption details, that third country transfer, so you can see what additional safeguards you have in place. So that's why it's crucial you fill that out, because as much information as you put in, you'll get on the report. So that is the data flow mapping tool itself. So this is the bulkiest section of today's webinar. The other modules are reporting, it's more questionnaires. So I'll go through what they look like and get a feel for them and just show you the types of questions. If any of you are already using any of our tools, but you've seen, perhaps you've got the data flow mapping tool, but not GDPR or DPIA or any different combinations. If you let me know, I can give you a trial access of any of the tools that you are missing, so you can see for yourself and you can read the questions in depth and you can see how they all work together. So I'm just going to save this map. It is online, so the saving icon will always be on the top right hand corner, and then every now and then it will prompt you to save as well, so it's just something to be aware of, I should say. Okay, perfect. So now here you can really clearly see how DPIA Tool integrates with Data Flow Mapping Tool right next to each other. So I've got a example not on this process. So if I go into here, you can see here, so if we say we were just on the process that I'd mapped out, the map that we just created would be shown here. So this is how these directly link. You've mapped out your process, you know the flow of your process, or actually, okay, it's probably high risk, let me see if I need to do a DPIA. And this is where you go. So the DPIA is geared for repeatability, so you can reopen and you can update any section of the DPIA as you need to, so rather than starting from scratch. You move along periodically, going from 1, 2, 3, etc., and then you'll have the different statuses on there: not started, in progress, completed. So I'll just show you some of the questions, or the style of the questions. So step 1, process description. The questionnaire here is prompting for information about the process in question. So you created the initial process description when you mapped out your process, but now it's getting to the more in-depth information. You can see here what type of processing it is, the nature, the purpose, etc. So you can see the type of questions here. And you can see how many you've done as well as you're going through, so you know where you're up to on that particular step. And then you would save. So then step 2 is the screening question. So this is where you actually determine whether you need to do a DPIA or not. As we're going through as well, every single question for every single section is referenced. So this helps you as the user. You can go through and you can read up on wherever that's referenced, so you know why you're being asked that particular question. It'll give you that additional context. So you can see here, you've got the 3 areas of the step 2 of the determination. So depending on your answers, you would then know whether your DPIA is mandatory. So you'd go through all of those, and then you've got the determination and whether you accept or reject that. So you can see here we've got reopen and update. So when you want to go in and edit any of the steps, you roll back the DPIA. This then allows you to go into an edit mode, and then you can revisit that. So consultation, step 3, questionnaire. It will prompt you for information about the parties you've consulted, such as your data subjects or your representatives. Then you've got step 4, so it's principles questionnaire, so it's all about the 6 data protection principles. It's just asking for information about the necessity, the proportionality of your processing, so what measures that you have in place to uphold your data protection principles and your data subject rights. So I'll show you what it looks like. So you can see you've got all of the data protection principles there. You've got how many questions. Each of the answers is yes, no, don't know. And then every single question, there's an additional text box. So you would be as specific as required in here. So add as much information as possible, because it's all going to be shown on the report, which is what you're using for accountability, or just to show that you've taken the necessary steps to ensure that you needed to do a DPIA. And you can see as well, every single question is referenced as well. So that's step 4. Then step 5 is slightly different. It's the privacy risk assessment. So this is where you have the means to identify your individual risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects. It includes evaluating levels of risk and determining risk responses. So I'll just go back to reopen and update so I can show you. Perfect. So if you go to edit settings, this is where you set your acceptance criteria, your risk appetite. So the assessment name, that would be whatever that particular process is, could be the process name. And then you've got the likelihood and impact scales. So how you as an organization, how you scale this is completely up to you, whatever you see fit and whatever fits your risk requirements. The additional context you can see here, so say you had likelihood scales that are probabilities, or once a year, once every 6 months, etc. This allows you to be specific with that. The same with the impact here. So we've got what the impact is on your C, your I, and your A, to do with the personal data, which is very important. Of course, that's what you're trying to protect: the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's already there. You can edit these definitions if it's not relevant, and then you can add additional context. So perhaps you want to say, well, if this risk did happen, what is the financial impact on my organization? So you can clearly state that with numerical figures. So once you say next, then you got your acceptance criteria. So again, this is all about your risk appetite, where you see an acceptable risk to be. You can edit the values, you can rename it, and you can also add a criteria as well. And then essentially you would add a risk, so whether that's an asset-based risk from your asset register or a scenario-based risk to do with the process. And you simply just walk through this. So it's all going to be relevant to that process. You'd select your asset, you then select your threat, your vulnerability, you would then assess the initial risk, set your response, controls, etc. So I'll show you an example. So we've selected our asset. And as well, in the settings section, where you could add customized personal data items, that is where you'd also add your customized threat and vulnerability. The list we have is very extensive, but we do appreciate there might be some that are lacking. And then here is where your acceptance criteria grid comes in. So say you did have what that financial impact would be based on where you select your tick or where you place that risk, you'd be able to clearly see that. And then of course you set your response, and then you'd move through. It will give you access to ISO 27001 in this. If you had Compliance Manager, it'll give you access to a few other controls as well. So that is simply your risk assessment. So once you save that, finally, you've just got step 6, which is your review. So this is where you just review and you finalize your DPIA. So very short, it's just got 2 simple questions. You can see you've got yes or no, and then the room to add additional information. And that's your DPIA. So we've just got the GDPR Manager to go through. I'll show you the report. So you can see here as well, just now, how each of these tools, so you've seen the data flow map tool, you've seen the DPIA tool, they both have their own functionalities, but they do work directly to strengthen each other. So I'll just show you the report. It exports into a Word document. So again, you don't have to use our Cyber Comply. You don't have to use this logo. You can use your own company's logo. It's basically everything you've just seen. So it has the title, it has every single question and your answer, has all of the tick boxes. So if you go yes or no, your screening questions, your determination, whether you've accepted or rejected it. it has yes, no, not applicable, but then it has the details that you've added additionally. This is your risk assessment, so it gives you in a table format, so you can just clearly see the risks, what your initial risk is, how you've responded to it, and then what that residual risk is after you've responded to it. And then that's simply your report. So that is the tool, that is the end result of the DPIA. And then, like in the other areas of the tool, you can add any comments as well. So I'll go back to processes. And that is the DPIA and data flow mapping tools. So we just need to go into the GDPR Manager, and then we'll summarize, and then I will do the Q&A session. So if you've got any other questions, please keep popping them in the question box, and then I can get back to you at the end. So to get to the gap analysis, we'll go here. Now you can see the gap analysis, it's got the British Standard 10,012. So this is what it's aligned to. The BS 10,012 is an appropriate standard for your personal information management system, which should be part of your GDPR privacy compliance framework. So it's all related, and this helps you to see where you're up to with your GDPR compliance. So with this, you can see here clearly you've got the different areas. As you're going through, there's a total of 333 questions in all of those areas. So as you're working through, you can see this will start to populate. So, you know, if you save it and you come back in, you know where you're up to. And the compliant is which questions you've answered yes to. That will show, so you know where your gaps are. The same with here. So every single one of our questions on every single one of these areas is referenced to the particular article and the clause. So again, you can use this for additional context. You can go and do some reading. You know why exactly you're being asked that particular question. So I'll show you the layout of section 8. It's our longest one. You can see here as well in each of those, you've got how many questions. So this is the layout. This is how they all look. So you can see here, okay, British Standard 10,012 clause, and then GDPR Article 25. So it gives you all of the information you need. Then you would select the appropriate, and then give additional details. And the additional details will be on your report. So that's really crucial. And then you just work your way through. So like I said, you know, rather than on today's webinar reading through the 333 questions with you on this session, if you want to, or if you want me to provide you with a trial access to any of the tools that you've seen today, please do give me a shout, and you can go through and you can have a read of these during that trial time. So I'll save and complete later. So another thing to be aware of, so there's the task window, so you can add tasks, you can assign these just like the other areas of the tool to any of the owners, set a deadline, link it to anything that's relevant as well. Any comments, so you can add comments. Again, if there's any supporting documentation that you wish to add, you can do so here. And then of course you put off your gap analysis report, and you can print it to PDF as well. So you can see how that is. Oh, of course, I've got no answer on all of those, but that would build out as you build out your gap analysis. So let me go into tasks. So all of the tasks so far that you've seen, or I've mentioned, so in assets, in processes, and also here the tasks you assign, they will all fall under organization tasks. So for any of those broader tasks, if you want a report of all of them to show the relationships between the risks, processes, records, etc., this is the area of CyberComply you will go to. So no matter what tool you have access to organization tasks. So the other three, these are GDPR Manager specific. So you've got your breach report. So like I mentioned in the introduction, this allows you to really record that breach. if you can see here, so you've got different, so if there's what action that you need to take following that, have you notified the relevant parties, etc., the scope. So this allows you to document and report all of that relevant information. So to create new, you simply create new. You would enter whatever that breach reference is, who's the owner. So again, the owner must be someone that is a user on your tool. However, you have the read-only role. So if it is a senior management, but they're not active, as in they don't have editing capabilities on the tool, you can assign them a read-only role and still assign them as an owner. So when you pull off the report, you will see accurately who that owner is. Then you've got the date and time, so when you became aware of the breach, because of course you've got a very restricted time on when you have to notify of a breach. So you'd add those in, and then depending on that, you would then have the deadline, time and date. So if I edit here, you can see on this occasion, the deadline was the 8th of May. So this is why it's completed. Status is completed. So once you've created your breach, you would simply go through, so you can see all of these. You've got this will build up as you go through your questions, so you know what you've got left. Every single question is referenced as well, so you can go and you can read up about it while you're being asked that particular question. Anytime that there's a date required, there's also a time. Just because of the nature of reporting breaches, it has to be so, or is within such a strict timescale. That's why there's got the exact hour and minute that you were notified of that breach. So you can see here as well, we've got taking action. Across any of the reporting tools, any reports or any questions that have tick boxes, essentially yes, don't know, not applicable, etc., have a give detail option, so you can always add as much information as possible. Another thing, so with the breaches, you can associate a breach to any of your risks. If you are a customer that has VS Risk Cloud, then you can associate that as well. Or with the DPIA, you can associate any of your personal data breaches. So with that risk assessment that we did on the DPIA questionnaire, if any of those are relevant to the breach, perhaps the risk was the breach happening and it has happened, you can show this on the report. So you can select that. So this was on our DPIA, and then that would just show that relationship. These are any comments, like you can see any documentation, and then the audit trail, any processes. So from your data flow mapping tool, any of the processes that you've mapped out, or any of the processes that you did conduct a DPIA on, you can add that and it will show in a report that they are associated. And again, you can add any task to the report, maybe the breach, maybe it's a reporting task. And then you can pull off your report here. So you can pull your report off. You can specify whether you want a report on all the completed breaches, all the overdue ones, etc. And this report I will show you. So you can see the status, you can see all of the checklist, how you've answered those. And then where you've added any additional information, so any of the risks, assets, processes, they will show on that report. So I'll take you into DSAR, and then we'll go over third-party management, and then that is the end of going over everything, and then we'll just do the Q&A. So our DSAR tool. This is login any data subject access request. So again, of course, you've got a deadline as well. So it allows you to keep up to date to ensure that you are within that month period of having to provide the data subject with all of their information. So you simply create new. You can see here we've got the name of the data subject, the date of receipt, so when they did actually request for all of the information, and then the source here as well, whether it was the data subject or perhaps they're working with a third party who's requested the information. Summarize the details. There is a link option here as well, so just to strengthen the information that you actually put into the tool. An owner, again, anyone who's a user on the tool, including that read-only role. And then when the deadline is. So 1 calendar month. Then once you've done that, you've got your breach report. So you would then go and your data subject access requests checklist essentially. So you'd go through and answer these however's relevant. Again, you've got the reference to each of the questions: yes, no, not applicable, etc. You can go in and edit as well if anything does change. If there's an extension for some reason, you can add that. And then here as well, you've got the same old tabs that we've seen through. It just really allows you to pull off such a variation of reports on the tool. So any risks, including your DPIA privacy risks, you can associate. Any personal data records that are associated, so the ones that you've mapped out in your personal data, you can show this on a report. Any assets, so perhaps any of the assets that are involved in the processing of those data items that actually store those data items that the data subject has requested, you can run a report to show that relationship. This is audit trail, comments, any processes, any tasks, and then with Compliance Manager, an additional module, any related regulations and controls. In the same way that you could for the breach report, you can view them on different statuses, whether it's not started or completed, etc., and then you can pull off that report. And then finally, we've got the third-party management. So this is all about the due diligence on your third party. So just ensuring that they are up to scratch with their data protection practices. There's two different questionnaires as well. So we've got one for the controller, one for the processor, depending. So I'll download those and I'll show you what they look like. Simply to create new, you just fill in all the information. You've got what they're acting as, the information, etc., your details, your owner, and your deadline. And then once you've created that, there's a checklist, so you can see here, and you've got choose file. So I'll show you the files, I'll show you the questionnaires. So this is the controller questionnaire. So you can see here it's got your contents, it's got a summary. They can do this online as well, so they don't have to print it out and scan it. It's just asking about the processing activities, the personal data, etc. And then I'll show you this one. So same but processes. So you've got summary, etc., etc. Perfect. So that's your third party. And in the same way, you can show all of these relationships. So these are how all three of our privacy tools tie in together, is the reports that you can show. So it will mean that you do your compliance with GDPR by mapping out the flow of your personal data items, conducting a DPIA on those high-risk processes, accurately recording any breaches or DSARs, and then with all of those three as separate modules, separate parts of GDPR, all of them tie in and strengthen one another to strengthen your compliance and that demonstration of that compliance. And it's the kind of reports that you run which are key to doing that, and using the functions that allow you to show the different relationships and making the most of those. And that essentially is our privacy suite, all three of those tools. So just before we go into the Q&A, I'll just show you the dashboard again. So now you can see that we've got the assets, we've got, so that's your asset register, you've got your gap analysis, so your personal information management system. You can see as you're going through that, you've got your third party management, any data breaches. So now you can see how you get that top level view. Organization risks, you can select that to be your privacy risks, or there is a section here if you only had DPIA to look at the privacy risks. This map here will just give you a location of all of your assets. So you'll just see different points on the globe where your assets are located. It doesn't pick up the amount that you have in particular locations, but it's just good to see where you are spread globally, and perhaps even how far your data is reaching and what other safeguarding you have to have in place. Then you've got all of the tasks. That's your dashboard. So now it's time for the Q&A. So I would just like to thank, before we go into the Q&A, I would just like to thank everyone for their time this morning. I know there was a lot to get through, so I do hope you did find it useful. My voice hasn't put you to sleep for the last hour and a half, and you know, it does give you some understanding of how helpful these 3 tools can be, and also how they work with one another to strengthen each other. Like I mentioned, we can offer a trial. So if there are any of the tools that perhaps you don't have and you are interested in just seeing how they work together, let me know. I'll set that up. But if not, I'm just going to pop myself on mute for 2 seconds while I just read some of the questions, and then I will read out the question and answer, and then I'll wrap up and I'll say goodbye. But for now, thank you.